Ainey, you're applying there to the old yoke that you go back up there and on Facebook, your little fella Anthony, little midget there with a little balaclava on him, talking about sickness. But Big Patrick is telling you what to say about sickness and stuff like there. He has your route, Ainey. He has you gone like an innocent by doing what he's saying. But there's a few fella here who wants to say something to you here for a minute.
Well, Ainey, this is me, Patrick, again. We'll go back to the one-out story as you're my uncle and I'm the nephew. Well, let me tell you something. You're long enough going around claiming that you're a king. Well, we'll start off why you should not be a king. You had a father, old Barney McGinley, the light of heaven to him. I was very fond of him, and he was an awful good, tough man. And he made McGinleys what they really were. And when I say McGinleys, I'm talking about old Hueys and old Willies and the rest of old Ainey's boys, like me father, and I'm talking about me uncle Bainey's family. And when we go to old Barney's side, I'm going to say me uncle Simon's, me uncle Dulty's, me uncle Anthony's. Are you listening to me? And Maureen Connell's family, all of them, except your family, Ainey. Because the reason why you're a shite and calling yourself a king, when the Stokeses in Donegal town, back nearly 30 years ago, when your father was somebody, God help him, they went down with a slash hook and you praising the Tornahans and the Stokeses, you're licking their hole, Ainey, because they cut your father's arm off on the ground. And you went down crying a couple of months later, please Doty, I have nothing got to do with this. You can kill my father. Do you remember them words, Ainey? Because I certainly remember them when I was only a fucking child, Ainey. When you watched your own father's arm getting cut off. And now you're up on every YouTube, you and your sons, Christy Stokes, up the Stokeses. How would you say up the Stokeses that cut your father's arm off and you call yourself a king? I call you a shit and a sheepdog. That's what you and your sons are. A crowd of sheepdogs. And do you remember the day the film Stokes took you out in Dublin, Ainey, and put a hammer down through the top of your skull, Ainey, and ran your Barney? You must have a sharp memory, Ainey, of the Stokeses. Us and the Stokeses has a fight, Ainey. And believe me, Ainey, when it comes to meat, we'll meet. They might get the better of it, we might get the better of it. But believe me, there's only me and two young fellas and we'll stand our ground. But for you being a sheepdog and licking their arse, and Ainey, how would you call yourself a king, Ainey? When the bar Mahons, Ainey, ran ye like rabbits, Ainey, through Stoke and Trent, for God's sake, Ainey, look at your houses. Look at that Terry Mahon out of London, Ainey. For God's sake, look what he done, Ainey, to your Christy, Ainey. Didn't he run Christy out of a disco, Ainey, and run him like a sheepdog, Ainey, around Stoke and Trent? Didn't they run your Simey out of a van, Ainey? And you talking about being a king. A king never lost anything. I'm going back to you and Joe Joyce fight, and I'm going to tell the real fucking truth. When Joe Joyce came out with Shirteen McDonough, rotten drunk, listen, when Shirteen McDonough came out rotten drunk, him and Joe Joyce, to the road in Athlone one time, Ainey. Do you remember that? When you bet him with the rings into the face, Ainey, and he sat in the tow bar of the trailer. Do you remember that evening that my mother and father come up and took the rings off your hands, Ainey? And Mammy says, Ainey, you're going to get life in jail for baiting him with the rings. The man come out next morning, Ainey, with no eyes, Ainey. And ye attacked his sister, Ainey, in the road, Ainey, so he'd give up the fight. Ainey, you were fucking bet that night, you sheepdog, you. And how could you be a king? And go back to Dan Rooney, Ainey. When Big Patrick and ye start arguing after the fight, Ainey, where you lit in and whispered to Dan Rooney, I'm bet. Big Patrick and ye argue for 5 or 6 months. Big Patrick is the man, Ainey, that turned around and says that Dan Rooney bet you. And you're all saying that Dan Rooney turned a Christian because you made him a Christian. No, Ainey. Dan Rooney thought he killed you. And Dan Rooney couldn't get over it with the baiting that he gave you. He never forgave himself, Ainey, and he went preaching to God ever since. God helped the man. And I'm not again Dan Rooney for this. And that's why the young Felix, that young fella that fought Simey, that's why he never threw a punch in the fight. Because Dan Rooney went down with a Bible the day before and made the young fella promise that he wouldn't throw a punch at Simey. Because of what he done to you. You're a sheepdog, Ainey, and you always will be, and you never were a king or never will be a king. Do you understand me? Because, do you understand what happened, Ainey? Your grandfather's arm was cut off with the Stokeses, Ainey. For God's sake, and you kissing their arse. Know what you should be done? Burdened in fucking petrol. And for Big Patrick going around to get you to say that his granddaughter is sick, that he's a rotten hell old bastard below with his blue face on him. Because he can't do it himself, him or his handicapped sons.
That's all Blue Peter is
it's over now. That's what Big Patrick is. He cuts hair from the women. That's all he can ever do.
And it's
The uni barber.
the proper McGinleys and down the
And listen, if people wants to know who the McGinleys are, listen till I explain to you. The Sligo ones are the Sligo McGinleys. Old Huey's family would die to the backbone. Old Willie's family, they were McGinleys. Old Ainey's sons, Bainey and Willie and Noel. Are you listening? But the other three, they were adopted. And they came under McGinty. And there was 4 of them adopted at the one time. That was you, Ainey, Big Patrick, Tommy and Barney. And the 4 he was adopted. Old Barney took 1 and Big Mammy took 3. And you were McGinty's that was got in Donegal town in a basket. That's why you're called McGinty's. And as all ye are scandal givers and talking about sick and talking about the dead in the clay. The big mammy and daddy above buried in long for the turning in their grave if the new big Patrick was going around giving his own grandchild scandal. Did the curse of God in him, and that every daily man in the country may look at him when he walks into the fair. How could he howl his head up to curse his own grandchild?
vermin.
He's only vermin. And you, Ainey, you're no king. Because I heard you saying you were bet by Joyce. And Big Patrick heard that you said that you were bet by Dan Rooney. And I can put my hand in the Bible that Big Patrick told everybody that. So if you're talking about lick arses, Ainey, you're a lick arse for Big Patrick and a puppet on a string. And go and get your own back for your father's arm that was cut off 30 years ago. You sheepdog, yeah. And another thing, Ainey, you're talking about scandal. Well, you the fella, Ainey, was with Winnie in the toilet. Were you in Ballinasloe? You own the little queer the son Stokes has beyond. And Winnie, that Mikey fella is your son because he looks like Anthony. You fucking idiot, yeah. Anthony and him and the other fella, you're all queers. So wake up and cop yourself on, will ya, man? Sammy, Mikey, and the whole lot of you squares. And you, Ainey, going around an old he-she below in the north. You were down with God's McDonald the other day, and God said it to me, Patrick, I hope he goes home. He says he won't leave me sister alone. Go and ask God's McDonald that, and he's a straight man, Gogs, and he's young fellas. And he came to me at in the York, and he said to me, please, he says, will you tell Ainey leave my sister alone and stop harassing her on the phone? I says, Gogs, there's nothing got to do with me. And I left it off at that. And Ainey, we hand you a few pound to go and wash yourself and put on clean clothes that night. You still have the one clothes on you. You dirty vermin bastard, you.
Ainey, I remember your Simey in Hollow with me and Meowflu and I'm to get a pizza in Hollow, me and Meowflu. And your son Simey was crying in the front of the van after you went off with the woman that your son Michael hit you on top of the head with a kit and knocked you out. You remember that? I remember your Simey crying in the front of the van and the words you said back to Simey, how could you leave a young woman for an old woman? That you're making dirty your own wife, you dirty fool, you. That's all you only are. Dossers in the middle
now,
of
Ainey, you dosser, you. Go back to the bar Mohans that's ruling you in England and go back and lick Christy Stokes' arse. The man's brother cut your arm off. Well, fair play to them, they got away with it. Listen a minute. Some people would let go, some people wouldn't. If it was my father, I certainly wouldn't. And how could you go and stand with the Stokeses? And Nan, I have to say this to you too. How could you make the Stokeses fill them out tea after cutting off your brother's arm? You dirty old vermin whore, you.
Another thing, Ainey, as well.